But could you kind of break down why, either go into them specifically, or why the people who are trying to represent animals now and actually are trying, the models they're using aren't enough? Is that a right way of putting that?
Yes, so the wardship model, we also call it sometimes the consideration of interest model. Um, so this is the idea that to bring animals, so all these theorists are concerned with bringing animals into politics, into that political circle that Will was talking about. So how do we do that? For on a wardship model, the idea is that, well, no, animals themselves aren't political agents, so they can't participate in this process that we've just been talking about directly, but they have interests, and those interests must be represented when humans make decisions. So humans are obliged to take account of those interests. And so what that requires is that, humans who know animals, human experts, define what their interests are. And then there's various schemes out there for how those would be incorporated into parliaments or other forms of legislature, legal and political decision making. But the fundamental idea is that unlike with humans, where we think it's important that their voice be part of the process, um, the idea is that animals, they don't need to voice anything here. Humans have the expertise to know what animals' interests are. And many theorists in this area tend to assume that animals have a fairly limited number of interests, like they have a lot, some basic needs and wants, but we can identify those, and it's where we should be focusing on is is making sure that those are taken into account in human decision making. So that's inadequate for all the reasons that we've been talking about, right? No, animals are agential. They want control over their lives. They have ways of doing things that we should value, and moreover, just as when we think about human democracy, that even if you think about adults and children, for example, adults always want to think that they know better, um, what children's needs are or what's best for them. And of course, we had then, as children grow up, have this very complicated process of assessing that changeover to their taking more control over their lives. But the point is that we always tend to underestimate the agential desires and longing and capacities of others. And especially humans vis-a-vis animals. We just assume that we know better, that there are all kinds of things that they don't understand, that we're better at judging what their needs and interests are. But that's not the point. The point is they have their own lives. They have ways that they want to lead them. And so there has to be in the political process a recognition that they have that capacity and desire and right to be self-determining. So that's our issue with the wardship approach, is that it doesn't acknowledge that. It just thinks that there is kind of objective interests that need to be represented. There isn't a process there that animals need to be part of. The resistance, there are a lot of critical animal theorists in recent years who've done this wonderful work on thinking about animal resistance and identifying cases of animal resistance. Um, so this is, um, yeah, animals pushing back in all kinds of ways on how humans treat them, how humans govern them. And so this is definitely a way of recognizing animals as agents, right? This is animals not just being victims, not just taking what's meted out to them, but fighting back against those trainers or breaking out of that zoo or slaughterhouse or whatever it is. Um, and so this is important because it is focused on animals' agency, but it's our concern here is that the limitation is that agency isn't just about saying no. It's not just about fighting against the things that don't work for us and that we don't want. The kinds of agency that we're really focused on in this book are sort of positive forms of collective agency. So when we need to get things done together as a group, all the things that we collectively need to organize and manage and take care of. And so, uh, so both of these models that I've discussed so far, I mean, there are important elements of those that are part of our story. And of course, attending to animal resistance is crucially important. But our worry is that it's not enough, and that we need to think about sort of legitimate forms of collective agency, not just fighting against illegitimate forms of government and power. Um, and a lot of people working in the critical animal studies tradition are maybe not anarchists, but have a lot of issues with the state and state power, and so there's just so it's understandable that they're focused more on resistance type stories, than on this kind of positive dimensions of collective political agency. Um, so that's the limit there. And actually, Will, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk about the cosmopolitanism.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on the first one, the wardship model. We have a long discussion about why that's people's initial instinct when it's pointed out that animals' interests aren't taken into account in politics. Many people's natural instinct is to say, okay, let's appoint someone who will speak on behalf of animals. So we call this politics on behalf of animals. Um, and it's a perfectly natural reaction. And many city governments and others have appointed someone to speak on behalf of animals and in that way try to include animal interests. But as Sue said, I mean, there are lots of reasons for thinking that it's a part of the story, but it can't be the whole story. And just one of them is that on many of the most important issues, we think we humans just are not in a position to know what animals want. So if one of the purposes of politics and of democracy is to find out, what people want, what their preferences are, we do not yet know what many of the most important questions to animals face. So for example, if and when we abolish factory farming, if and when we abolish animal agriculture, we are confronted with the question of what kinds of lives do horses, cows, pigs, chickens want to lead? I mean, it's amazing that we've lived with these animals for millennia, but we actually do not know what kinds of lives would they like to lead if they've been liberated from industrial factory farming. Or um, and there are actually lots of different possible lives they could lead, and some places, like some animal sanctuaries, are trying to give animals an opportunity to explore different possible lives. But this is a process of exploration, and in our view, politics it includes. It's not just about counting existing preferences or existing votes. It's a process of learning and exploring together. And so if we're going to figure out a just future with animals, it's something we need to learn together, explore together. And so we need to think about politics as not just having a human speak on behalf of animals. We need to think about what would be spaces and places where humans and animals can collectively experiment, learn. Okay, and so that's one of our reasons for thinking that the wardship model is just not going to be enough, because we just don't know. We don't know what animals think about many of the most important questions about the future. So the third option that we look at is cosmopolitanism. And it's interesting here that for many animal advocates, and this too goes back to Peter Singer, but it's found across a much wider range of traditions and schools of thought within animal ethics and animal politics. It's assumed that animals will do better in a world in which we get rid of borders and boundaries, and we all just become more kind of cosmopolitan in our political identities. So clearly, any animal rights view is committed to the view that animals have moral status. And so moral status expands beyond the family, beyond the tribe, beyond the nation, beyond the human to animals. So all animal ethics is cosmopolitan in the moral sense that it views moral status as expanding beyond any delimited social group or national group or nation state or whatever. But we're interested in political cosmopolitanism, which is the idea that political boundaries should be weakened or dissolved, which could take the form of trying to create a global democracy